Niles, don't you want to say hi? Wait. Hello everyone and welcome to another classics discussion. I am so excited for this one as today we are talking about this book, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. It was written in 1920 and the year following its publication it actually won the Pulitzer Prize, consequently being the first time this award was won by a female author. So it's special for many reasons. This book is so much more than just a forbidden romance and love triangle. It's a beautiful story about passion, duty and sacrifice, and it can teach us a lot about character motivations and decisions. Just like last time, I will start this video off by giving a synopsis of the story. Should you wish to skip that for some reason, you can head on over here for part 2, which will be my analysis and discussion on why this is a love triangle that works. So why don't you prepare yourself a cup of tea like I have here and sit back comfortably and enjoy. The Age of Innocence is set in 1870s New York and follows a man named Newland Archer. Newland comes from a wealthy family and moves in high society circles. Despite his family's wealth, he has an occupation as a lawyer, but this is mostly for show as it was considered proper for a gentleman of his status to have such an occupation. Newland is a traditional man with traditional values, but something is hiding underneath, a tendency for romance, adventure, and a modern, progressive way of thinking. However, this side of him wasn't really nurtured by his peers, least of all by his fiancée, May Welland. May is also part of his social circle, and them getting engaged was a match made in heaven for both families. Not to mention, they were actually in love, and Newland felt himself blessed to having found someone like May. She was sweet, beautiful, and had high morals. What else could one wish for? So the story starts off with two major events occurring. The first one was that May's cousin, Countess Ellen Olenska, had just left her husband in Europe and fled back to New York. It was quite the scandal, and rumors were flying around about her having left him because she was ill-treated and then went on to have some raunchy love affair with his secretary. Everyone seems to be equally appalled as they are intrigued about Ellen's scandalous life. The second major event occurred closely afterwards, and that was that May and Newland made their engagement official, which was quite the big deal as May's family was currently undergoing the scandal of Ellen Olenska. Seeing as Ellen is May's cousin, it doesn't take long for Newland to meet her. After a brief encounter at the opera, they meet properly for the first time at May's and Ellen's grandmother's house. And Newland's first impression of her is negative. He thought of her as being too European, too familiar and inappropriate, teasing him about them having played together as children and even suggesting that he should come and see her sometime. To which Newland is actually quite astonished. Her entire being seems almost alien to him. But just as with everyone else, there was something about her that intrigued him, like an accident he just can't look away from. He thinks about her and her situation with some uneasiness. It made him realize what a gamble marriage really was, and he began to think about his future with May. Had he been naive in thinking that his marriage would be so happy? Especially since practically none of his married friends had been so lucky in their marriages. So, Newland continues to run into Ellen and finds that she's actually quite interesting once you give her a chance. She doesn't follow the social conventions of their society, which makes her unusual and refreshing. One day she invites him over to have tea at her place and he accepts. And once he's there, he's immediately taken in by her strange way of decorating and her honest and open way of communication. But it's also making him a bit uncomfortable. They have a deep discussion on how she wants freedom and he begins to feel sympathy for her. Later on, Newland and May have a discussion on their engagement. May's mother has insisted on them being engaged for a whole year because, social protocol. And May was a good girl who always agreed with her mother. Newland, however, was very much annoyed at this. He was in love and he wanted them to get married sooner than this, even throwing out adventurous ideas like elopement, which May thought of as nothing more but a good joke. This is where Newland starts feeling frustrated with May and he wonders whether she even has opinions of her own. So the story continues with Newland's boss handing him a case he wasn't too keen on accepting, Ellen Olenska's divorce. He goes to see her to discuss this and tells her that it's a bad idea even though he agrees with her sentiments in general. New York society was small and traditional and doing something like that would ruin her reputation forever. She reluctantly agrees and decides to take his advice. By now you could say that a real friendship has formed between them and they continue to see each other in their mutual social circles. Then comes the time when May is to travel to Florida with her family as they do every year. And being the gullible sweetheart that she is, she asks Newland to keep Ellen company in her absence as she thinks she's very lonely. So Newland sends Ellen a note asking if he can drop by later, but isn't given a response. A couple of days later, a letter arrives from Ellen saying that she is going to stay the weekend with some friends in their country house by the Hudson River, and strongly hinted at there being something she was running away from. And suddenly, Newland remembers that he too was invited to stay the weekend with friends in that area, and off he goes. They did end up meeting there, and there was definitely some flirty tension between them, even a slight bit of hand-holding. But before she could reveal what she meant by her note, they were interrupted and thus unable to speak freely. Then we go back to New York, and Newland is quite uneasy about an acquaintance of his, Mr. Beaufort, giving Ellen a lot of attention. And even worse is, he believes her to actually enjoy this attention, and is very much disgusted by that. There's definitely a hint of jealousy. So when Ellen sends him a note asking him to stop by, he ignores her note and books passage to Florida to visit May. He goes all in for May. He's showing his passion by kissing her and begging her to move up the wedding date. But he gets pretty much the opposite reaction from her. Why can't he wait? Is he afraid that he might lose his affection? Is there another woman? All of these questions which Newland can't really find an answer to. They have an argument which leaves them both disappointed. After his short stay in Florida, Newland goes back to New York, where he receives another invitation from Ellen to come and visit her, which he does. Now, this is where things take a whole new turn. Newland tells Ellen about his argument with May and even admits to Ellen that May might be right about there being another woman, meaning her. They confront each other about their feelings, they even share a kiss. But eventually, this also ends up with an argument and with Newland crawling on the floor, kissing Ellen's shoe. In other words, things got intense. Just as all of this was going on, a telegram arrives. It is from May, telling the happy news that her parents have finally approved of them marrying earlier. The wedding will happen in 1 month. So, we flash forward 1 month and it's wedding time. We learn that Ellen has moved to Washington and will not be attending the wedding. Newland goes through it with a kind of numbness and then goes on to spend 6 months traveling through Europe with May before settling down in a house of their own in New York. He had plenty of things to distract himself with there, like picking a new horse for May's carriage or decorating his new library. And when people around them spoke of Ellen and what she was up to, he would listen with a mild interest. One thing, however, seemed inescapable for Newland. His marriage to May wasn't what he had naively hoped it would be. Apart from minor annoyances like how uninterested she was in their travels and how much she cared about which outfit to wear to a dinner party, there were also some bigger issues. She really was a simple-minded woman who wanted a traditional, simple life, and he was an intellectual with a thirst for adventure. So, more months go by and they have now been married for 1 year, and it's time to spend the summer in Newport with May's family. Newland has kind of taught himself to be content in his situation, as his wife was actually very sweet-tempered and beautiful, not to mention one of the most popular women in their society. He admired her in a strange sort of way, despite finding her lacking in other areas. As they're in Newport, Newland runs into Ellen's aunt, Medora Manson. They have a conversation where Medora mentions Ellen, and for the first time in a long time, Newland feels his heart jump at the sound of her name. This turned into a bit of foreshadowing as May and Newland later on go to visit her grandmother, who was also staying there, and find out that Ellen was visiting her too and had just gone outside for a walk to the beach. Unsurprisingly, Newland is given the task of going to fetch her. As he did so, he found her standing with her back turned. He stopped there for a little while, watching her and see if she would turn around. And when she didn't, he went back to the house, claiming that he couldn't find her. This is where we find a shift in the relationship between Newland and May as they discuss Cousin Ellen's situation. May says that she would probably be a lot happier if she would just go back to her husband in Europe. A statement which Newland finds outwardly cruel of her, and he isn't afraid to say so. It becomes apparent that all of May's family feel practically the same as her, and Newland is therefore cut off from any further discussion in the matter. A few days later, Newland finds out that May has gone to Boston, and he makes up some business trip excuse to go there and see her. And when he does, he finds out that she has just been approached by an emissary of her husband's with an offer of a lot of money if she would return to him. It was a grim situation, and as an attempt to cheer her up, he convinces her to spend the day with him. Unfortunately, this turns out to be a bit of a tragedy. Once again, they confess their feelings for each other, and Newland even admits that he only married May because Ellen had told him to. And his whole life was a fake, and he found it unbearable knowing that he could have had a real one with Ellen. He begs her not to go back to Europe. And she agrees to this, but on one condition. She wants Newland to remain in her life, but at arm's length. He has to accept the fact that should they ever cross the line and actually start an affair, she would have to leave him and return to Europe out of respect for May. It's with a heavy heart that Newland accepts these conditions. Back in New York, tension is rising between Newland and May, and he finds out by other means that May and her family have been continuing discussions about Ellen without him. This is a low blow for him for many reasons, but most importantly, he doesn't like being kept out of the loop when it comes to Ellen, since she's back living in Washington. Several months go by, and despite them trying to keep him in the dark, news of Ellen's declining finances reaches Newland's ears. It seemed like her family was trying to pressure their grandmother to cut Ellen off financially so that she would have no choice but to return to Europe. We're getting to the end of the book now, so events are happening more rapidly. Grandmother has a minor stroke, which causes the entire family to gather around her, and even Ellen is telegraphed so that she can come too. When she arrives, Newland has taken upon him the task of fetching her at the station. They have an awkward moment, but they quickly get back into their emotional discussion about the unfairness of life and their situations. At one point, Ellen even gives Newland a passionate kiss to show her inability to stay away from him. Strangely enough, Newland doesn't really have a problem staying at arm's length because he's realized that he wants so much more than that. He tells her that he wants her to be his future, for them to get out of their respective marriages and just go away somewhere where they can be happy together. Ellen, as romantic as she is, has been through too much to just give in to such a naive idea, and tells Newland that there is no way for that to be able to work out. Newland is very hurt by this, and they part ways after this somewhat heated argument. One day, Newland is summoned by Grandmother to her house. There, he learns that she has actually no intentions of abandoning Ellen like the rest of the family wants her to. In fact, Ellen would be staying in New York with her from now on. She suspected him of being on Ellen's side, as none of the other family members ever spoke of his opinions when they discussed Ellen. Newland had the suspicion that this sudden decision of Ellen's to stay with her grandmother didn't just have to do with her financial situation. He suspected that, of course, it would have something to do with him, so he asked to meet her somewhere in private where they could discuss this. And as always with these two, things take a bit of an unexpected turn, and by the end of the discussion, Newland found himself forced to choose between two options. The first one was to continue being part of Ellen's life, but never actually together, out of respect for his wife, her cousin. The second option was for them to be together once, but then she would return to Europe. Let's just ignore the lack of logic in this and just accept it for what it is. And Newland, being shocked and overwhelmed by having to make this decision quickly as Ellen had to leave, agrees to the second option in the heat of the moment. They decide that they will get together in 2 days' time. But things, of course, never really turn out the way you think they will. The next day, Newland has pretty much decided that he will leave May and follow Ellen to wherever they would need to go to get away from everything. And he was just about to confess this to May when she interrupts him and starts talking about Ellen's plans of moving to Europe. May had met her at their grandmother's house, and they had a good heart-to-heart there. And May even admitted to having judged her unfairly in the past. After their discussion, Ellen had left for Washington immediately. So Newland is kind of thrown off by Ellen's sudden change of plans, and even more so by his wife's sudden wish to throw her a going-away dinner before she left for Europe. And this turned out to be quite the awkward dinner indeed, where Newland and Ellen were forced to sit next to each other, just trying to talk indifferently in the company of their friends and family. Not to mention Newland being paranoid about them having suspicions of their relationship. After the dinner had ended and everyone had left, Newland is once again set on confessing to his wife and letting her know his decision. He wants to come clean and follow Ellen to Europe. But May interrupts him again. This time it was to share the happy news that she was pregnant, which of course changes everything. Newland was now faced with a new choice, and he chose duty over love. The book ends with a time jump some 30 years into the future, with Newland reflecting on the family life he had lived with May and their 3 children. He never saw Ellen Olenska again, but he never forgot her. His memories of their moments together remaining a fantasy of the possible life they could have lived. Just like with many classics, the characters really make up the backbone of the story. Without these complex characters, the plot would be nothing more but a hollow shell of mindless entertainment. So I thought I would start by presenting the main characters of the story, and by doing so highlight the differences between them. We will then continue by looking at the different relationships between these characters. First we have May Welland, later on Archer. May is really the most straightforward out of all of them. She's a simple-minded girl, more interested in athletic activities like archery or tennis, rather than reading or doing embroidery or things like that. Having grown up in a wealthy, traditional family, her values are one and the same as that of her parents, and many times Newland sees her as a younger copy of her mother. She does, however, have many positive traits. She's sweet-tempered, she would never cause a scene or any kind of drama. She's also quite selfless and cares a lot about the happiness of the people around her. These are traits that Newland values and he admires her for them, but it doesn't change the fact that she is very conservative and traditional, which causes a lot of issues in their relationship. Now, moving on to Ellen, we have a very different scenario. Compared to May, she had the very opposite upbringing, as she was raised by her aunt, Medora Manson, who would bring her from country to country wherever she found a new man to marry. Each time it would end badly and they would flee back to New York with even less money than the last. Ellen is sensitive and passionate. She doesn't hide her feelings behind a well-rehearsed smile. She's also unfiltered. She says what she thinks, even though her opinions might be considered bold. She's the kind of woman who would go and visit a person despite them being shunned by society because of some large scandal. She doesn't care about being tainted by association if she can be there for someone she cares about. She's also someone who would choose happiness over duty, like when she left her husband in Europe and fled to New York. Her hopes of getting a divorce shows her modern values compared to that of May and the rest of the family. If we continue with Newland, we have a variety of personality traits. At the start of the book, he lives the life of a very traditional sort of man. This is the environment which he grew up in. And when you surround yourself with people of certain opinions and values, it's very easy and comfortable to just go with the flow. Apart from this, Newland is interested in books and learning, and even more artistic writing such as novels and poetry. He's an educated man, which helps him become more open-minded than his peers. But he lacks the maturity that comes with experience, which is not that uncommon for a 20-something-year-old, but it shows in his actions and the decisions that he makes. Now, let's have a closer look at the relationships between these people and what makes the dynamic so interesting. I want to start with Newland and May, because we learn a lot about them at the start of the story, and it's interesting to see how their relationship changed over the years. So at first, they barely know each other at all. They have their first kiss at the party where they announce their engagement. And they both have a naive look of how their future marriage will be. Newland is definitely a romantic. He sends May her favorite flowers every single day. He literally goes to the florist every day, which May thinks is really sweet because most men within their society would just place a standing order. Newland thinks that they are properly in love simply because he didn't get tired of her during those months of courtship, which is, kind of strange way to look at things. But that was his reality. He had seen other girls before seeing May, and he had found them very dull very quickly. Not that May isn't dull, she's actually not a particularly bright or even a well-educated person, which Newland finds very disappointing, but he plans to do something about that once they're married. Once Newland starts seeing Ellen more often, we see a shift in the way he sees his fiancée. There is an element of comparison, especially when it comes to May's values and her way of thinking. And he begins to thoroughly dislike things about her that he previously did not have a problem with. He is, however, still intent on marrying her and pushes for them to have their wedding earlier. It's only once this was finally approved by May's family that he realized that he no longer wanted to marry her. But by then it was too late. So he goes through with it and spends his first year of marriage without seeing Ellen. Even though he's far from happy, he can somehow suppress his longing for Ellen and focus on May's positive attributes. But when Ellen comes back into his life, his resentment towards May reaches a whole new level, even going as far as him wishing she was dead at the end of the story when he wanted to leave her for Ellen. This makes me wonder, if Ellen had never entered his life, if she would have just stayed in Europe, would Newland have been happier in his marriage to May? It's an interesting question. At the end of the book, we find out that May had admitted to their son that Newland had given up that which he loved the most because she had asked him to, thereby admitting that she knew about his love for Ellen all along. Let's move on to the relationship between Newland and Ellen. This one is a little more complex, but all the more intriguing in my opinion. So like I said earlier, his first impressions of her were not very good. He's disturbed by her scandalous life choices, and he even dislikes her associations with May and how that makes her family look, as he was about to marry into that family. But then there was something about her openness, the way that she spoke so candidly about people, that intrigued him. And each and every time that he meets her, there is something new about her that shocks or surprises him. It's clear that he sees her as kind of foreign and exotic in the way that she acts. But apart from that, Ellen's longing for freedom and a divorce awakens something within Newland. He really wants to help her, but he understands that New York society won't be very forgiving towards her should she go through with the divorce. She already had a bad reputation, and Newland kind of goes behind her back to try and help her in this. For example, there was a dinner party that was supposed to be held in her honor, but all the guests declined their invitations. So Newland asks a favor of his very influential relatives to host something for her, which of course nobody could decline. He would also defend her whenever someone spoke ill of her. He was basically her personal knight in shining armor. Ellen finds out in some way or another about this, and it really plays a big part in how Ellen's love for Newland is developed. There's also the fact that Newland loves her for who she is and doesn't just want her for some illicit love affair. That one is fairly common nowadays, but this book came out in 1920, so we can't really judge it for that. As we know, they could never really have each other and spent the remainder of their lives apart. I can't help but wonder whether a lot of Newland's obsession with her had to do with the fact that he couldn't have her. He never got the chance to explore his compatibility with her, and thus his attraction for her never waned. While the ending was perfect in its own way, another tragic ending to the story would have been Newland and Ellen going off to another country somewhere to be together and realizing that they weren't in fact right for each other in the end. I just love tragic endings, so that's just me speculating. We actually have a third relationship to talk about that I find really important, the one between Ellen and May. As I said before, Ellen and May are cousins as they share the same maternal grandmother. The relationship was quite friendly at the beginning of the story when Ellen had just come back to New York. May seemed to be genuine towards her cousin and really wanted her to get back on her feet and feel welcomed by her friends and relatives. As much as Ellen appreciated the kindness shown towards her, she always had a way of going against the social conventions, which May found increasingly difficult to approve of, especially since May's mother had very firm opinions on the matter. As a result, they ended up being estranged for most of the story. Despite May choosing her family's side against her, Ellen always thought of her with affection. This, of course, made her relationship with Newland even more problematic, as she would be troubled by guilt for her feelings towards him. In the end, when Ellen and May meet at their grandmother's house, they finally sit down for a private talk for the first time in years. At this point, May pretty much knew that there was something going on between Ellen and her husband, but she hid her feelings and pretended that everything was fine. During this heart-to-heart, May ended up telling Ellen that she was pregnant. Later on, we find out that May wasn't actually sure of this at the time, but she told her that anyway. Now, May is not really a devious person, so for her to say that simply to get Ellen to leave doesn't really feel right to me. I believe May told her this as a way of pleading to her cousin, that if she continued the relationship with Newland, she could potentially break up a family. And of course, Ellen's guilt takes over and she makes the decision to leave. And all of a sudden she's gained her family's support back and everyone is gathered at her farewell dinner wishing her a pleasant journey and a happy life, basically. So what is it that makes this story different from other more cliché love triangles? While the standard love triangle likes to focus on the two options, personality, attractiveness, and overall chemistry with the person in the middle, most of the time it really has to do with the inability to choose between two perfectly good options. Let me explain. I've seen very few that focus on the middle person's personality, especially in relation to his or her two options. In the Age of Innocence, neither May nor Ellen is a perfect option. They both have major flaws. May is too traditional and conservative for Newland to be genuinely happy. And Ellen is a wild card. She's impulsive and dramatic. And not to mention, she's already married to a cruel man who's hell-bent on having her back. While these situations are very different, they mirror that of Newland's personal identity crisis. It all comes back to Newland, and that's what I find so interesting about it. He longs to break with the traditional values of the society he grew up in, but he also feels a belonging with them and a desire to keep their good opinion. These two sides of Newland are in constant battle with each other throughout the story, making his choice very difficult. And this is where we get to the final thing that makes this love triangle stand out from so many others. Because he finally makes his choice. He's prepared to burn all of his bridges and flee the country with Ellen. This is when May tells him that she is pregnant and therefore he is forced to stay and let go of the woman he loved. It's a romantic tragedy with a bittersweet ending, as we later learn that he embraced the family life and he really loved his 3 children that he had with May. It is really a story about sacrifice, the things that we are ready to give up and the things that we are not. Before I end this, I would like to say a big thank you to those of you who liked and commented and showed your support in my last video. That video felt really personal to me, so I wanted you to know how much I appreciate it. Sometimes just a few words of encouragement can go a long way. If you have not seen that video and would like to see it, I will leave a link to it in the description below. If you enjoyed this, then please remember to give it a like and subscribe if you have not already done so, as it would really make my day. If you have any thoughts on the Age of Innocence or anything else that comes to mind, feel free to drop me a comment. As always, thank you so much for watching today, and I hope to see you back next time.